welcome to In Conversation with Brad Wendes, and today I've got another fascinating guest. This one comes all the way from Edinburgh, which is why we're doing this one remotely. I've got John Hedge Hall, who's a parkour practitioner who's got some really interesting stories to tell. So I won't say much more about it. Hedge, come and introduce yourself.
Hi. Yeah. My name's John Hall. Everyone calls me Hedge. We might get into the reasons for parkour nicknames at some point, but effectively, I am the executive director of Access Parkour, which is the largest coaching organization for young people in the UK. I've been a full-time parkour coach delivering for 10 years. Before that, I was doing part-time coaching for 5 years-ish. And so I've been around for quite a long time. And I guess the interesting thing, the reason I think you want to talk to me is because I originally trained as a scientist. So I had this really odd way of getting into being a business owner. And I've also done lots of other bits and pieces from all over the place because I can't sit still and have 1,000 projects at any one time. Yeah, so that's me. Hopefully we can unpack some of that soon.
Yeah, and that is the fascinating part. So with parkour people, you kind of find a lot of, because parkour is quite a young sport, you find a lot of very young people got involved in parkour because that was their rebellious outlet. Whereas I think you and people like Scott and to an extent maybe Dan are slightly more intellectual people who have found themselves in the parkour space. And I think that's really interesting that you aren't a baggy jogger wearing hoodlum, yet you're still really into parkour. And that's a bad stereotype because I don't think I paint myself for that one. But yeah, what were your early influences? What did you want to do? What was your aspiration when you were a child?
Astronaut, scientist, rock star, I think was
in that order.
What I was at about the age of 12, 14. When I was a kid, I assumed that I was going to be some kind of scientist. I was good at all the hard sciences. I was good at maths. I understood systems. I could solve problems. I was very good at taking in data and understanding what it meant. And all of that meant that it seemed like I had a pretty clear career path in academia kicking me off. And I was pursuing that. But parkour came into my life when I was 15, which was in 2004. And it was just like we saw Jump London and we went, oh man, that's cool. Let's go and jump on some things. And I had till then been a competitive runner and I played in a lot of sports at school. I had a very sporty school and my whole life was very competitive. So I was running, trying to qualify to run for Scotland. I was trying to win the Scottish Schools Athletics over summers. I was working at a fairly high level. And looking back on it, I realized one of the most interesting things about it was I had a very toxic relationship with competition. So if I won, my assumption was, of course, I deserved to win. I was the best. And if I lost, I was really angry. I hated myself. I was really upset with everything that was going on. There was just no way to enter competitive arenas that didn't make me feel bad, or at least didn't make me feel good. But times when I got to be challenged intellectually, where there were problems to solve, where there was cool, weird things going on, really, really appealed to me. And I loved deep diving into weird subjects and solving weird problems. And parkour, when you sort of break it down, is solving problems in a physical manner. So we saw this thing and these people were jumping between walls and they were throwing themselves at things. And initially I kind of got into it and immediately tried to be the best in the city and try and outjump everyone and do stuff that was harder than everyone. But it's hard in parkour circles to hold on to that for very long, or at least it used to be. And you ended up sort of just throwing that out and instead becoming fascinated by stuff that was really, really hard and seeing things, people do stuff in all different directions. So whether or not that was the guys doing the huge leaps, the guys doing leaps to very, very small, accurate things, these really fluid, beautiful movers who looked like dancers, and it kind of fractured. And as it fractured, I found myself more and more putting down the big competitive jumping side of parkour and picking up this odd problem-solving, weird techiness and fluid dancey style. And a lot of my influences that really changed the way I move, and I will always be forever grateful to, is Chris Grant was probably the guy that showed me weird, technical, horrible movements.
Wow.
And
Okay.
when we were kids, so Chris is 5 years older than me, but we used to hang out all the time. We were super close when we were kids, and I would follow him around because he was older. He was, more experienced.
So just for
And
context, he was what,
he wasn't
21
able
at
to
the
jump as
time,
far as-
22?
Yes, a little bit later than that. I probably started hanging out with Chris when I was 18 and he
Okay.
was 23, 24.
So that is quite a significant gap, far more than it would be now.
Yeah. He looked after me, very much so. But then when I was in my 20s, we hung out a ton because I wanted to learn so much from him. And he really is the one who showed me the really technical, difficult stuff is more interesting than the big stuff. And then Scott Houston from Glasgow and Sam McFarlane. These were the guys, that was the big scene when I was a kid, who were moving in ways that really inspired me. And I just ended up really capable of just dropping a lot of that competitive edge and becoming fascinated by solving really, really difficult problems.
Okay.
And that made me feel good. So instead of having this really toxic relationship where, like, if you win and if you lose, you hate it, you instead just loved what you were doing. You lost time in trying to solve these things. Some of it was very short. Some of it was, this is a jump I want to do. And some of it was, I want to be able to muscle up, but I'm a scrawny 18-year-old.
Would you be like your brain would allow you to break that down into like, I'm going to do some pull-ups, I'm going to do some dips, I'm going to do these exercises, I can feel progress as I go? Or was it still like, I want to do this thing, how do I do this thing?
It was this lovely discovery that if you work hard, you get good. And it was just so easy in some ways. And at first it was just working really hard. And then it was, oh, and you have to eat well, and oh, and you have to sleep well, and oh, you have to look after yourself. And if you do those things, then you become big and strong. And if you feel big and strong, you can do more and you feel good. And if you get hurt, you look after yourself. It was all these very healthy, very sensible lessons that when you're in that hyper competitive, I need to win right now mode, you just can't consider.
Okay. That's interesting because I allude sometimes to like parkour being more, there's still a competitive side to it. Instead of it being you against someone else, it's almost like you against the challenge, you against the obstacle. Did you ever feel that frustration when there was a challenge that you hadn't completed yet? You couldn't break that jump?
I have literally cried over being unable to do a jump.
Okay.
Yeah. And it gets into your head and it can become emotional and it can become scary and it can become overwhelming because you have all these different factors. One is that if you see someone that you consider yourself to be on a par with doing something that you can't do, that's very frustrating. And that's the competitive side of it. And it still exists and you can't pretend otherwise. But another one is just you occasionally become obsessed with being able to do something. And the process of doing parkour should be, and mostly is, when you work really, really hard, you succeed. And that's true 95% of the time. But sometimes you fail. And the better you get and the more obsessive you get, the harder that can sometimes be to internalize.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a fairly obsessive personality like mine.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parkour people that can really identify with that grinding mentality, that almost like the video game, I need more XP, I need more XP, I need more XP, I can't beat that boss yet, and have the mindset to go and do that. Whereas a lot of people in the world will look at something and go, I'm never going to be able to do that, so I'm not even going to try. And I think that when I'm speaking to my guests about them achieving their goals and going where they wanted to go, there's a lot of that comes through. Is like, I chose to say yes. I chose to just do that thing. I chose to try and do that thing, even though it might not have been the best thing at the time. I could see the end goal there, or that's just what I wanted. So I guess that moves on nicely because we've got a little bit of background on Hedge. So what was it that you wanted? You wanted to be an astronaut, rock star, and then you've ended up doing something which I presume that you love. And how did you get there?
So I went down a very conventional university experience. I studied chemistry, undergraduate, master's, began studying for a PhD. And my experience doing my PhD was hellish. So I left university with a first-class master's degree, top 10 in my year, very, very good at sitting exams, very, very good at answering questions, very, very good at writing essays. Found the process of learning and being able to explain things very, very easy. Went into a lab that was incredibly high performing because I'd gotten this very good grade, and entered into this world where none of that meant jack shit. And instead, you were expected to do exactly what you were told and solve problems in the way that you were told by a man who hadn't stepped foot into a lab for 15 years. And if you said things like, I don't think this is possible, but I'm really excited about this, you got told no. And I look back on it, and I'm fully aware now it was an incredibly toxic environment. It was badly managed from top to bottom, and it was also just not for me because I was expecting a creative environment and I did not find one. I found basically an incredibly rigid hierarchy of people who didn't really care for the truth, instead cared mostly about funding.
Okay.
Whereas if I'd known more, I would probably have entered into a much smaller research group that genuinely cared about the research. And I'd probably have done very, very well because curiosity would have been valued. But because I did well, I ended up in the highfalutin areas, and that screwed me over massively. And it was horrible. Like, falsification of data was like normal everyday practice in the group because they wanted money. There was this whole thing called lithium air, which every single paper was basically just a lie to secure more and more money. And it went on and on for years, and it just doesn't work. But it didn't matter because it would make them money if they could publish another paper about it.
So do you think that was representative of kind of science at that level? If you weren't in a small lab, if you weren't in a small group, do you think that that's pretty much par for the course, or is this an unusual place you ended up?
I think that whenever you enter into high-performing systems, you can often move away from, especially when there's a lot of money involved, you often move away from systems where there's such thing as a technical truth, and instead you move into areas where it's about who you know, how you know them, and what you can claim and what you can make it look like. I know there's an awful lot of very good science out there. I have seen some amazing scientists doing some amazing work, but I'm also aware that there's some very, very questionable science out there, mostly built around who can get the most funding, and that's a natural part of any ecosystem. It gets abused, and that's a real shame. And I was really unlucky to enter that environment. But one of the most fascinating things from your perspective is I was just talking about this really high-performing kid who was doing really, really well, working really, really hard. He was really into parkour. His assumption was if he worked hard, he could do anything. He goes to university, and suddenly he is the lowest performing person in the group, barely able to get any work done, sometimes just turns up to work and stares at a computer for 8 hours, then goes home. Completely useless individual. Same person. And it took him months to convert from one to the other. 4 years of depression and horrible life and hating every moment of it. And then he left to start his own parkour company because it was such a horrible environment to be in. And it took me maybe 3-4 months to get out of the slum, but back to being this really high-performing whiz kid who could teach people and do all these things and really active and all over the place. It's amazing what some environments can do to people.
So why parkour?
So why did I become a parkour
Yeah.
coach? I loved parkour, and it was the only thing about my life that made sense. And I hated where I was. And more importantly, I found that the reason that I was good at the exams and the reason I was good at the studying is I liked learning and I liked teaching and I liked talking about how to get better at things. And parkour coaching is getting better at things, and it's teaching. And as I was doing my PhD, I was also teaching kids parkour, and I was terrible at it. Brad, I was rubbish. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. I was working with a guy called Stuart Wilson from Fife Parkour Coaching, and he had no idea what he was doing either, but he was just doing it anyway. And I was so bad at it, so I was determined to get better at it. And the evolution in my practice over the course of those 5 years, I went from someone who did not know what he was doing to someone who was a fairly decent teacher because I just wanted to get better at it. And I took parkour and I applied it to parkour coaching. And actually there, I have more pretty good influences. So I had a lot of a really good relationship with Parkour Generations throughout that period.
Yeah.
I ended up disagreeing with a lot of what Parkour Generation stands for and does, but very respectfully doing so and deciding to learn from them, take the really good stuff at PKG and try and create my own version.
Without jumping into like the specifics or anything like that, but you say like fundamentally disagreeing with a lot of what they do. There's a lot of really good coaches, and there were a lot of really good coaches within that organization sort of back in that time. Did you appreciate and like their coaching methodology and their training methodology and dislike the business practice, or was there just a general like I've got my own thing now and I want to move on?
So Parkour Generations taught me how to coach parkour, along with Glasgow Parkour Coaching. Those were the two organisations that did most of the work to teach me. And from Glasgow Parkour, I learned a lot about work ethic, and that it wasn't really about doing big jumps, and instead it was about helping people make changes to who they were. From Parkour Generations, I learned about the technicalities of warm-ups and cool-downs, how to run sessions, and Parkour Generations has a fairly formulaic way in which they run sessions, which is mostly to do with the way in which they build up a route throughout a session and conditioning and strength work and such forth. And it's really, really good, but I do think that it is based in a particular style of strength and conditioning training built into technical training. And I don't think it is the only way. And I think that when I pushed back specifically about effectively it being as simple as if you work hard, you'll get better, I think I ended up with some disagreements. I remember basically during my level 2, which is the lead coaching exam, I had an argument with pretty much every other coach there, where it was like, more work isn't necessarily better, and just because you make them do a horrendous conditioning exercise won't make your students happier or better. And a lot of them basically said, actually, parkour, we're heavily influenced by l'art de déplacement. Look at the Yamakasi, look at how healthy they are. Making them do these very, very strong repetitive conditioning exercises is really healthy. And I went, no, there's more to it than that. You've got to think about the individuals, and you've got to think about the unique learning experience of the individual and where they're at in a process and what they're trying to achieve. And you've got to realize that some people are here to enjoy themselves and some people are here to work really hard, and understand that you have multiple audiences. And they were basically looking at a specific audience. And if you look at the Parkour Generation stuff, you still see it. They're looking for people who want to feel special and unique and feel strong and different from others. Mm-hmm. It's the same marketing that you get in CrossFit, people who want to feel a specific way. And it just wasn't the market that I wanted to talk to. Hence the naming of my organization, Access Parkour. We wanted to work with young people and children and those from disadvantaged backgrounds and help people get back into movement. So we just were looking at a very different market, which we thought would be much wider market. We thought there'd be much more people who wanted to have a more pleasant, playful experience instead of this performance-based, strong, unique, special, superhero feel that you get in some other organizations.
Yeah, and that's a fair, like you say, there is a market for that. There absolutely is a market for people who want to do that CrossFit side of things, that want to be strong and want to do the toughest challenges, but that's not accessible for everyone. And I think certainly, I know, sort of running a coaching organization, I see people approaching us and saying, oh, I've got a kid who's not very strong and not very confident. Can he come along? Is it all about doing big jumps? You're like, no, absolutely not. This is the most accessible activity you could ever imagine. Ground level, wearing a pair of trainers, wearing a pair of jogging bottoms, just come down and play. And I think the play side, I know that you're a big advocate of, and playing and exploring and finding your own way is so fundamental and important to parkour and making it accessible. I really like the fact you've called your organization Access, because it is about just getting involved and playing. So how did that work out for you, having this kind of really accessible activity that was so diametrically opposed to that like hyper masculine, super tough challenge ethos that we're seeing elsewhere?
Well, I struggled to shake it a lot, especially at the start. So I was still very much a product of the people that had helped form my opinions. So I think I still hold on to the hard training style of things quite hard. And I have a very strong rule, which is try not to criticize something unless you're very, very familiar with it. So I've done the train very hard, be able to crawl for 20 minutes, 1,001 squats. I've done the ADD stuff. I've been able to jump incredibly far, sticking huge precision jumps. I can do all the basic flips. As a general rule, I've done most of the styles of parkour, so I feel much happier being able to criticize and talk about what's healthy for a human body. And I didn't necessarily put a lot of it down. We still had a bit of that feel. But as we moved into it, I found I was attracting all sorts of people from a variety of backgrounds. Many of the people that I was finding were people who felt a bit lost. And parkour, for whatever reason, was a place that they could come even if they were feeling a little bit lost, and they could really work hard and solve problems in a controlled environment, even when the rest of their life felt incredibly overwhelming. And I don't make much of a secret of the fact that I'm not neurotypical. I'm on the autistic spectrum, and I am also a little bit different. I also feel a little bit lost. So finding a space where people who didn't feel like they fit in suddenly fit in really clicked. And that's what Access Parkour has spent an awful lot of time doing. And part of it is about making them feel comfortable playing again. Part of it is about helping them structure challenges in their lives so they feel like they're somewhere where they're succeeding. Part of it is just about finding people who like solving problems like them. And each of these things creates a style and a feel of a community, which I've become really interested in helping build. And so that's what a lot of it was about. It was about helping me and the people around me surround themselves with people like us, people with our interests, which was different from what a lot of other people in society were doing. So a lot of other people were going out on Saturday night, going to the footy, doing this, watching TV at evenings, the kind of the way that most people's lives run. That didn't suit us, and so we spent some time working at what did suit us, which was this weird parkour sport where you learn to solve weird problems.
It's really interesting that you should talk there about feeling included and being part of something. So one of my other guests, Gary, who's an actor, was talking about his upbringing. He's saying he was overweight. He wasn't very popular at school. He had a club foot. You know, he was that kid that wasn't popular at school. And I think some of us can identify with that. And he found this drama club, and he was suddenly doing shows, and he was on stage, and he was acting, and people were giving him a round of applause. And he found that tribe and that belonging in his acting and performing. And then he felt like he belonged somewhere, and he didn't try to fit in elsewhere because he already had somewhere he fit in, and therefore he became more confident and had some friends at school. And that was the catalyst. Finding where he belonged was the catalyst to him being a happier person. And do you think it's important to create those kind of spaces? Because we have kids, certainly in my place, that aren't sporty kids. They're kids who do parkour but might not play football, tennis, rugby, and will come here and get really good at doing parkour because they feel that they belong. They come here because they're part of the tribe, not necessarily because they want to do mad jumps to begin with.
So community creation is mostly about helping people understand the values of a place and then deciding whether or not they share those values. And there's sort of two ways you can think about that. One is thinking about people looking for somewhere to fit in. And almost always it's this really, really funny process of they turn up to the class and they're wearing the wrong kind of clothes. They don't look like they fit in. They maybe like they're very clean shaven and prim and proper, and everyone's in baggy joggers and has a beard or whatever, right? And then they'll like find they really enjoy what they're doing, and over the course of the next 6 months they'll grow out the beard, they'll buy the baggy joggers, and they'll start walking around with really garish colored t-shirts all the time and become obsessed with shoes, because we are both individuals, but we're also creatures of community. And when we find communities that make us feel valued and accepted, we join those communities, and that includes changing how we perceive and think of ourselves. So when I think of myself as a parkour practitioner, I look and dress like a parkour practitioner. And that's why fashion is so important in our lives, because we're trying to visually demonstrate who we are and figure it out. And it's a mixture of our individualisms and our group consciousness, which is why, like, if you're always wearing a hoodie with Kinetics Academy written on it, every child in your class will want to have a similar hoodie because they're trying to become part of the tribe. That's part of it, and it's really important. And part of it is about a sense of belonging. We all look for a sense of belonging. We are tribal creatures, and part of it is about feeling accepted and feeling a value and feeling worth. And also because like it's like a t-shirt, you try it on, you see if it fits you. And some people will look for, if you're someone who looks for camaraderie, a lot of physical contact, and you're a big person, probably you'll end up playing in one of the rugby squads because you like running into people. If you're someone who is shy and not very good with people, You probably won't. And every single sport has the kind of people that may fit better or worse, and all sorts of different aspects of it, some of which are physical, some of which are social, which make up the identity of those sports. And this is where inclusive practice becomes really interesting, because when you talk about inclusive practice, you talk about including as many people as possible. But actually, as a sport, you want to include as many people as possible while also delineating pretty firm lines of this is the sort of people that will probably be happiest here. And that's okay, and that's to be expected, because actually what you're trying to do is be inclusive of people while still being very clear. Well, you'll probably enjoy this because it's your kind of thing, because this is how you work. But actually, you probably don't like it here and won't be happy here. So let's find you a better environment. And you have to understand that is part of what community creation is about doing. We silo ourselves. Not everybody is the same. And as one of the weirdos, I can confirm that a lot of society is not like me and probably won't like the spaces I create. But a large portion of society still is like me, and we need to find those people. And ideally, we want to gather and make community with them.
Is there an amount of responsibility that comes with community creation? Because if you find somewhere that you belong and you're part of, do you then get influenced by others? I mean, one might argue that Charles Manson was a really good community creator. So do you have a responsibility to your community to try and keep things nice and healthy? And how do you bridge that? Because you see people that create tribes, and the one I use is often Paul Chek, who was a guy in the fitness industry, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly strong guy. And his journey took a journey into the spiritual. And he stood up at a fitness convention and started talking about trees and dragons and people looking at him sideways. So how do you manage your own personal journey and keep a responsibility to your community?
One of the really interesting things that seems to happen once you breach a certain amount of size and fame is reality begins warping around you, because you hold more power than others. This is problematic, because if you hold the power to influence people, what will happen is people will then come to you and try and influence you so that they can make changes that they want to make, because everyone wants there to be changes. So if you're the sort of person who's sitting on a lot of money, everyone who comes to talk to you wants you to put your money towards their cause. So reality begins warping around you, and corruption is almost inbuilt into a system. So anytime you are building your little clan of people and you're building and doing it your way, the initial steps will feel very wholesome, very good. The people involved will all share similar ideals. And when it's successful, you might hit up against a ceiling and discover you can't go any further, because the people suddenly arriving are different and they change the dynamic and they change the feel, and it doesn't work anymore. And you might choose to sink down and stay at a certain size. So you could end up, boutique gym, living your little life with your little group of people, and that's totally fine. Another option is you have to be able to change and adapt and realize that actually the more people you're speaking to, the more generic your messaging has to be. And so you change how you try and teach people so that it reaches more people. You dilute your message in some way. And then as you get bigger, you start coming against people who start playing politics and who start being manipulative, because these people swim in these bigger spheres, and little changes and being able to convince people of small things suddenly becomes much more important. And the skills of manipulation and politicking and knowing who to talk to and knowing who to handshake, and when you have backdoor meetings and all those things that you and I have bumped up against quite a few times in our life while working on bigger systems, are skills within themselves. And when you get to a certain size, you have to begin either understanding them or not being willing to work at that level, or finding allies who will do all of those things for you. And I think you just have to be aware that that's the truth. And there's a reason that politicians speak in political speak. And there's a reason that if you are incredibly wealthy, you are nervous around anyone coming to ask you for stuff, because everyone's probably always asking you for money. It probably makes, and so these things are real. And when you see them in play and you see the dynamics and the corruption and the complexity of scale, a lot of people will go, no, this isn't for me. And they'll back off and they'll keep their community small. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that something that's prevalent at the moment in modern society is the influencer culture, whether that be the attractive girl that's doing squats in her booty shorts and then starts selling you her wax melts from Etsy. she's built a community and is monetizing that community, and that can be a good thing if you're adding value to your community, or it can be a terrible thing if you're trying to rip off and extort money from your community.
And I don't think it's a terrible thing to be willing to monetize what you're doing or weaponize stuff and sell what you're doing if you think it's of value. But it is like the bigger you get, the more responsibility you have towards your own message, but the more your message will naturally twist and change. And you do have to keep that in mind as you are developing and building yourself out.
Yeah, whether you set out to try and build a community you can monetize in any way, shape, or form, that's not healthy. But if you've got a really good message and you can add value to these people by giving them, I know, an extra cost one-to-one, or a water bottle that's particularly good for whatever purpose they're doing, and if you're adding value to your community, that's great. But if you're just trying to extort money from them, that's really unhealthy. And I think as the economy struggles, we're in recession now as of today, then people are going to try and find more ways to extort money from other people, because the financial system we have is a finite system. If someone has more, someone else has to have less. So everyone wants to have more, and that means there's going to be a lot of people with less. And I think we see a rise in things like scamming and not even things that are illegal, but trying to extort money out of people, like selling crap on Instagram, because everyone needs money.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about where your morals lie. Are your morals about not ripping people off? Are your morals about doing what's best for people around you? Do you have a moral responsibility to overcharge some people so that you can undercharge others? If someone is paying far more than they should into your organization, but you know they're well off, to what degree should you help them choose a better deal? Like, all those things are totally valid. And one of the ways in which we're trying to resolve that up at Access relates to what I'm doing next. So I'm moving to Sweden this summer, and I am finishing off being a full-time owner of a parkour business. And Access Parkour is converting into a not-for-profit, where a lot of these moral responsibilities are written into it. So it's now a moral imperative for us to help people. There's a way for us to fundraise and try and raise money. There's actually much more rules in place that will allow us mostly to operate, to be honest with you, in the same manner. We've never really operated for a huge profit, but the regulations now push us to operate in this much more regulated manner so that we can continue doing good as we expand. Because it does become difficult to hold on to your moral center when consumerism just kind of comes churning along. Like, oh yeah, we can fleece the kids and sell them t-shirts for twice the price we really need to, and that'll make us a little bit extra money. But should we? It becomes, and actually now, okay, well, we're a not-for-profit, so even if we do fleece the parents for those t-shirts, that money will get spent on doing good because our organization does good. And so it becomes a little easier to answer those questions. And I think that's good. And I think more small organizations could consider going down a not-for-profit route to help them make that transition from big little gym, if you will, organizations the size of yours or mine, into something doing good for the greater community in general.
Yeah, I think that's a tough transition, and we've been doing something similar down here. So we've got a not-for-profit organization running in tandem with the limited company, so the not-for-profit can get access to funding and can run projects which don't involve taking money from participants. And then we keep the publicly funded stuff. Actually, again, chatting to a guest this week, there's so many great ideas out there from so many great minds. Is an acting coach, and he was talking about having done the Pay It Forward scheme. So he said, well, there's an option when someone buys a session to buy 2 sessions, and then he just banks that session. So if someone comes to him and says, I can't afford it, you're like, that's okay, I've got 10 sessions in the bank, here you go, have one. So those that have got a little bit more money, it's completely transparent. If someone buys 2 sessions, and I was like, well, actually, I think I'm going to implement that. I think I'm going to do that here, so that we've got banked sessions. Not only does that improve our cash flow because you've got a bit more money up ahead, but it means that there's no barriers to entry. Someone comes to you and says, oh, we really want to join in, but I can't afford it. I'm like, that's fine. Here, have 4 sessions because someone else has paid for them.
Generally, I've seen pay it forward work well in two sectors. One is small coffee shops where there's a visual representation of pay it forward, and very small service-based organizations where, again, it is one-to-one, face-to-face consultancy stuff. We tried it for the gym, and it was difficult, especially when working with parents buying for kids, to really implement the model well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of logistical issues. We're just moving over to a new booking system, which does allow us to kind of buy and share credits and things. So we're going to look into the back end of that, because you're absolutely right. It has to be transparent. It's not like we're just charging you twice and we're still charging everyone else once. There has to be some visible transparency to it. Otherwise, why would anyone trust the system?
A lot of coffee shops, what they do is they literally, like, if you buy one, you can put it on the wall or something.
Yeah.
So people can come in and just grab off the wall, which is a really nice.
Yeah, and that's something we could implement here. We've got a notice board in the waiting room. Every time someone buys one, you just whack it on the wall, and then someone else can use that to pay. It's open to abuse, as all things are, but I think if you're doing something nice, you would just hope people don't abuse it. You don't want the wealthy kid coming in going, actually, I'm going to stay for open session. I haven't got any money on me. I'm having this one.
It is interesting, isn't it? I think this is the fairly interesting discussion about the tragedy of the commons as a concept, and how Britain in particular has always been more willing to abuse systems that tend to try and do that sort of thing than other countries. And figuring out what it is about our culture that means we're often so aggressively averse to those things. So why is it that if that system exists, a middle-class mum will just come in and use up all the credits line? Because that might happen. Like, why do people do that in our society? And it does seem to happen quite a lot in some circles. We at Access Parkour, the way we've resolved that is we have a two-tier pricing system. We have the normal price and a concession price, and you can book them both online. It's exactly the same process. And we find that maybe 30-40% of parents use the discount price. That kind of balances out the open to abuse, pay it forward with, okay, actually, some people do need to pay less, and there's a way to do that.
Yeah, at present we got some funding from the local authority, so they paid for 40 memberships for 6 months, and we just used our discretion to dole those out. Yeah, it was amazing. It's a great scheme. Yeah, so our local youth service went in with Active Essex, which is our local active partnership, and they said that they had identified there were lots of people who wanted to be active in Essex that were inactive, and what the barriers were. So they just paid us upfront 40 memberships, 6 months of memberships, and then we used our networks to speak to people. So we contacted people that had cancelled memberships and said that they couldn't afford it anymore. We contacted local people that represented the care system. So we're looking at kids who are looked after children who don't always have access to these kind of things because there's a finite budget on their care. And again, looking at children who receive free school meals, which we have a database of, who have come to us through other schemes. And we managed to do, in fact, they renewed it at the end of the 6 months. So we ended up doing 45 kids for a year, free membership. There's no barriers to entry. Come down, play, join in. It's a great scheme.
That's genuinely fantastic. And one of the really interesting things about the spaces we exist in is that the gyms, of which there are, maybe a dozen or so in the UK, many of them are doing all sorts of things like that, and you just don't hear about it very much because we're just quietly getting on with things. So it's really wonderful that story can get out there and more people can hear about that, because that's some genuinely amazing work.
It's something that I struggle with personally. I think that if you do something good and you then tell people about it, it's not a good thing anymore. Like the guy who films himself giving a tramp £20 or a homeless person a burger or something. You're not doing it because you want to feed that person. You're doing it because you want other people to think you're doing good. So I really struggle with making noise about having done good things, because I feel like it detracts from having done the good thing if people know about it. But we live in a world where if we want to do more good projects, we have to let people know that we've done these things in the first place.
One of the big changes at Access was when I hired a general manager. Because it's her job, she's much better at doing those things rather than me feeling a bit nervous. But it actually comes on something that I'm really interested in right now, which is building a following and starting to talk more openly about what I do and trying to reach out to more people in general. It's never been something that I've ever chased. It's never been something that I've ever wanted. I've always wanted to quietly be an expert in the background, become very good at what I do, create a really good company. And the world is changing, and it is now more and more valuable for people to have presences and people they can talk to. And when they talk, people listen to them. And because you've gone a long, long time, when you were in the real world, when you were in your local communities and in your local networks being listened to, when you go into online discourse and you go and try and put up your long-winded explanations and your long-winded discussions, discovering that no one reads them, no one cares, and no one's going to pay you any mind. You want to start a podcast where you have interesting long-winded discussions for really interesting people? No one's going to listen to it. Isn't that interesting? Why? Because everyone is involved in their own. That's not a hit on your podcast, Brad.
No,
I'm sure
but
this will have thousands of
that's
followers.
in my brain at the moment. I'm spending all this time making and editing for 5 people to listen to this. But
Yeah, and that will happen. I launched a podcast last year. We did 7 episodes, and to be honest with you, if one had 20 listeners, it was amazing.
yeah.
But the point of the matter is, it's because you haven't cultivated a following, which is part of the way in which this world works now. And learning how to do that is its own skill, just as teaching is its own skill, just as coaching, just as coach education, just as running a business, just as networking is a skill. And I'm really interested in it right now. And my other love, as you know, but our audience won't know, is games and role playing and play. So they're connected. My love of parkour is for play. I believe that human beings should be playing a lot more than they are right now. I think people lead healthier and happier lives when they play. And I think one way to play is through parkour movement. But an equally valid way of playing is around a table with your friends, whether or not you're playing a board game, a tabletop game, charades, whatever it is. If you're with people and you are socializing and there are some rules, it is normally a good thing.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my pile of Dungeons and Dragons books on the bookshelf behind me. So
yeah, I mean, we can scroll up and find dozens of the things up there. But anyway, what I want to do is share my passion for play to a much broader audience. And one of the ways in which I'm playing around with that right now is in the RPG and gaming world, which I'm really interested in, and trying to figure out how to build a following. And part of the thing is just getting it out there, being willing to talk about the stuff you do. Every time you do something interesting, just pop it online. And most of it, no one will care about. But if you do it all the time, the audience will slowly build. People will start to follow your story. People will start to go, oh, I'm really glad that I keep a track of what Brad's up to. And I'm really glad that that meeting went well. And I'm really glad that he got that funding. And once you start doing it more regularly and people are following you, they are invested in your story. And this is part of the process, learning to tell stories. And so that process of building a following, it seems to involve actually putting information out there, that information being relevant and worth listening to in some manner, and also helping people understand the stakes of what's going on. Generally, people engage with stuff when there is some kind of stake involved, when there is good news or bad news, when there's potential upset, when people are building hype, if you will.
yes.
And when you can tell a story, when there can be stakes involved in the story, and when you are constantly doing it and engaging people in some manner, those seem to be elements, all of which will help us become noticed and build followings and become listened to.
That's fascinating. So interesting. Something else we're talking to the youth service about is doing sort of tabletop role playing and collectible card games, because it's a similar sort of crowd. It's somewhere safe they can be. It's somewhere they can feel they belong. The barrier to entry is really low. If someone's just coming to play a game, a pencil and a set of dice, which they can borrow.
And if they're playing Magic the Gathering, then they can't afford drugs. So
I dipped my toe into Magic the Gathering, and wow, yeah, there's a monetized audience. So, okay, so is there a connection between you moving countries and pursuing that, or are you going to pursue that elsewhere, or is that something you aim to monetize in the short term? What's next for Hedge?
I only have one life, and I want to have adventures in that life. And running Access Parkour has been one of the most rewarding adventures I've ever had. However, I fell in love with a Swedish girl and decided to marry her, and decided that the country we wanted to live in was Sweden.
Wow.
And so my next adventure is learning Swedish, moving to Sweden and doing something there. And part of the real fun element of this is that I don't necessarily know what that is.
That's cool. That's an
I will
adventure.
be teaching parkour. I will be teaching some circus. I'm also a fairly high-level circus artist in a few different disciplines. I will be doing something in the world of role-playing and community building in some manner. I don't know what that looks like yet. But I don't need to, because the fun adventure bit is I don't know what this looks like, but I'm going to go find out.
Wow. Yeah, that's terrifying.
I see how we both have smiles now.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And have you got you've got a place lined up you can move in with your
Yeah. So my partner and I have a flat in a small town called Edinburgh. I sent you the location recently, and you were wondering what the hell I was doing in the middle of nowhere.
It is the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. But there's work there. There's the local organizations want parkour delivered. Teaching parkour in Swedish is not as hard as you might think. So while Swedish people all speak English, children speak Swedish. So there's...
But you can demonstrate, you can play, and that is part of the joy of play. I've trained in other countries and done parkour in other countries with people who don't speak the same language as me, and we've trained all morning, all afternoon, all day, because you're just doing and pointing at stuff, and it's really good fun. That's what the future holds, just a new adventure for Hedge. I think we'll maybe start wrapping things up there, since we're sort of a little over 45 minutes, and I'm blown away. I'm really realized it's a fantastic conversation. So if people want to find out more about Hedge, where are you? What are you on social media, websites, these kind of things? Tell me.
We'll put my link tree into the show notes, I'm sure, linktree/John Hedge. But effectively, if you want to follow me for my movement adventures, you can go to Instagram /Access Hedgehog. And if you want to just follow me for the chat, I'm mostly using Blue Sky under John Hedge.
I need to jump on Blue Sky a little more. I think I follow like 3 people, so I'm going to get back on that, because Twitter really is the vile hive of scum and villainy now, isn't it?
It's getting worse and worse.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, John. I really appreciate your time. And it's interesting, we've known each other a lot of years, and I'm still getting these new nuggets of information. So it's absolutely fantastic and fascinating. Thanks for coming on. And I look forward to hearing more about your adventures and seeing what you're up to on Blue Sky. Thank you.